All right, we are live. This is very exciting. My first ever interview on Facebook Live. My guest today is one of today's leading speakers and authors on the theme of resilience, motivation, school climate, a positive work environment, and family relationships. During the past 40 years, he has presented nationally and internationally to thousands of parents, educators, mental health professionals, and business people. His talks are filled with practical, realistic, suggestions, and he is renowned for the warmth and humor he uses to bring his insights and anecdotes to life. He's the author or co-author of 18 books, including Raising Resilient Children and The Power of Resilience, Achieving Balance, Confidence, and Personal Strength in Your Life. I'm very excited to be interviewing my dad, Dr. Robert Brooks.
And it's a pleasure to be introduced by my son, Rich Brooks.
Thank you so much. Dad, first of all, before we get started, for those of you who are tuning in right now, I just want to let you know that we are going to be taking questions. So whether you have questions now or towards the end, we'd love to hear from you. My dad is an expert in all things resilient. So please go ahead and leave us a comment, and we look to hear your comments and join us and please say something to us. We'll take a few breaks throughout and kind of check out your questions. All right. Dad, so welcome to the show. And try not to tell any stories that are going to embarrass me, okay? Or otherwise destroy my resilience. Now, not everybody has had the benefit
very resilient, Rich.
Thanks. Yes. I always think of myself as the control child, and Doug was actually anyway. So not everybody had the benefit of growing up with you at the dinner table, talking about the Red Sox, the Celtics, and resilience. So how do you define resilience?
It's actually a pretty complex concept, but just to not overly simplified, resilience for me is the capacity to bounce back from adversity. We're all going to face adversity. But what I've often said, Rich, resilient people see problems as things to be overcome and mastered rather than to be overwhelmed by. What makes it so difficult in today's day and age with the coronavirus is that so many people are feeling overwhelmed because there are so many things that are pressing, so many pressing needs. But a resilient person, even facing the situation today, really has to have what I consider to be a problem-solving attitude and look at what they can do to really handle some of the situation.
All right. So resilience is something where no matter how difficult or easy your life is, it's something important because it does allow you to kind of respond to life's challenges.
I think it's one of the most important things. If you were to say to me, what will a parent love to see in a child? One of the things, there's certainly compassion and caring. One of the things is what I call a resilient mindset, the ability really to be much more hopeful and optimistic and to possess skills that will help them to overcome adversity.
All right. Dad, one of the things I've heard you talk about is the idea of a charismatic adult. What does this mean, and why is it such an important concept for leaders in business and in other areas?
What it means is when researchers started to look at what helps people to be resilient, that they interviewed a number of people who had really overcome great adversity, people who grew up in poverty and under racism, people who grow up in abusive homes, and they asked them a very important question. What do you think was the most important thing, even with all the adversity you faced, to help you to be resilient, to be more hopeful and optimistic? In every study that was ever done, Rich, the first answer was always the same. It sounded very simple, but in a very spiritual way, it's why we're all here. The first answer was, there was at least one person along the way who truly believed in me and stood by me, even one person. Now, the term charismatic adult came from a late psychologist, Julius Siegel. In an article he wrote in the 1980s, he called that person a charismatic adult in a child's life. And while some people may not like the word charismatic, his definition was wonderful. It's an adult from whom a child or adolescent gathers strength. Now, in terms of team leaders, in my books about resilience in adults, this to me just makes common sense. Even as adults, we need people in our lives from whom we gather strength. And what I've always said to team leaders and managers is this: every comment you make to one of your staff, every gesture, you can be that charismatic adult in their life. And one of the things I emphasize, especially where all of us, all the struggles we're having today, is there's a wonderful concept called micro moments, or micro affirmations. Even one or two comments, one or two phone calls to someone may make the difference whether or not they are more resilient or not. So what I always say to managers and business leaders is, you can be the charismatic adult in the life of your team. They can gather strength from you as long as you have a sense of what you want to do.
All right, so let's talk about that. How can a leader be a charismatic adult? What kind of steps should we be taking, both in a world that doesn't suffer from a pandemic, but also now where everything is remote?
Okay. First of all, whether we're in a pandemic or not, because when you raised the question, I had this thought that a lot of these ideas were written before we had a pandemic. One thing is, I talk a lot about a resilient mindset. And one of the things I talk about is a sense of personal control. And I'm going to bring this up first, because if a person doesn't have this, and I'll define what I mean by this, if a person doesn't have a sense of personal control, then it's difficult for them to really engage in actions that will help them to be a charismatic adult. What I mean by personal control is, resilient people basically focus on what they have control over. They put their time and effort into things that they can have an impact or influence over. People who are not resilient will spend so many hours and expend so much time trying to change things they have no control over. Now, what makes it very difficult, something I alluded to before, because of the coronavirus, most of us feel we don't have as much control over things as we would like. All of these outside forces have played a role. And what I'm going to say now, Rich, is, for me, one of the most important things I tell people is that we are the authors of our own lives. Sometimes we may not see it that way. And what I mean by this is that we have to look at, even though we may have no control over the emergence of the coronavirus, what we have control over is our response to things, our attitudes towards things. If a leader can sit down and say, I have no control over this, then what I say to that leader, a business leader, a business owner, what are the things you do have control over? And there are far more things we have control over than we realize.
All right, so I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about it in two ways. One is, I want to talk about it first, what we can do ourselves as leaders. And then also I want to talk about how we work with our team to make sure they're seeing the same things. I also just want to remind people that this is live and we are taking your questions. So if you do have some questions for Dr. Robert Brooks around resilience and leadership, please post the questions and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can today. So, Dad, let's start with the idea of, okay, I'm position myself as a leader or a manager within my company or within my organization. What are some of the things I can do that I have control over? What do you recommend? Where do we start?
Well, first of all, I think we have to start with ourselves. It's interesting, Rich. In all the discussions I've had with people, I say, you've got to take care of yourself first. If I'm speaking to parents, I say, you have to take care of yourself first before you can help your kids. And so there are certain things. There's a lovely concept that some psychologists use called TLCs. I used to think it was tender love and care, which it is, but therapeutic lifestyle changes. And, this morning I heard your interview on 207, which people don't know is the NBC affiliate in Portland, is you talked about a regular routine. So when I say TLCs, what it is one, to have regular exercise. You're not training for a marathon or whatever, but to really have some regularity. What we eat, part of it is, of course, I like to exercise so I can have that extra chocolate chip cookie, but even our diet. There's so many apps now on meditation. And again, you don't have to be a world's expert on meditation. Even learning during the day to take a break, to meditate for 10 minutes. These are all things so that if we take care of ourselves, we're not going to be as certainly as run down. So we have to take care of ourselves. Where it really starts then getting into both our relationships, personal and professional, has to do with the notion of a charismatic adult. We know that connections with other people are vital. And this is where it gets into, and please feel free to interrupt me because your question just triggered so much. This is where it really gets into the importance of maintaining relationships and connections. So when I talk to parents, I talk about making sure you have time set aside, just individual time for each of your kids, even more so during this very problematic time. But in terms of, say, as a business leader towards your clients or customers, don't wait for them to call you. Reach out to them and really discuss with them everyone knows this. This is a very difficult time. This is a very problematic time. I just want to feel and get a sense of how you're doing. And then a very important question I have found is asking them, is there any way I can be of help? Because when you offer that, what you're really saying to them is, I care about you. You're more than just a client. You're more than just a customer. So reach out to them. Don't wait for people to reach out to you. They may be so overwhelmed. What research has found is when, say, the head of a team reaches out to his or her team, or someone reaches out to clients and customers, the response from clients and customers is the feeling, this person cares about me. You're not even necessarily talking about the business relationship. How are you? Is there anything I can do? Because and then I'll be quiet because as I say, your question triggered a lot. There's wonderful research to show that one of the most important things in any relation, especially a business relation and a school relation, is to create positive emotions. And one of the most important positive emotions is a sense of connections with others. And that's why teachers who are doing distant learning, just be connecting with people is just so important in terms of connecting with your students and finding out how they're doing and being a presence in their lives.
Awesome. Dad, one of the challenges I think that people find is, like, you talked about a few really important things like exercise and, meditation or taking deep breaths and what you eat, and all those things are good. Sometimes we may want to instill some of those things in our staff if we believe that these are important. How do you walk the line between nurturing resilience through some of these critical things and coming off as an authoritarian, telling people, are you taking your deep breaths? Are you meditating? Are you exercising? Are you eating right? Like, we don't want to come across as being, the patriarch. We just want to kind of nurture resilience in these people. What is the language we should use, or what are the things we should do to make sure that that message of caring and empathy is coming across rather than some sort of dictate?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. What it touches on really is a topic I call empathic communication. And there are certain questions. Two main questions are, in anything I say or do, what do I hope to accomplish? But getting to your question, the second question is, am I saying or doing it in a way where the other person is going to be able to hear me and not get defensive? So if you came across and saying, look, there's all this research to show you should be exercising, you should be doing this, 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 and this person especially is feeling overwhelmed, even if they've had a good relationship with you, they're going to feel like, oh my, another burden. So in terms of empathic communication, I started asking myself, okay, so how do you communicate? And it's something like this. You could simply say to them, there are things I have found helpful, and I just want to bring this up and see if any of these would be helpful to you. And then you bring it up. You can't force people to necessarily exercise. You can't force this, but you bring up these, these particular ideas. Is it possible for you to exercise? So the diet we use, you could say these things have been helpful. And then if you want, which can be very helpful, is say to them, have you found anything that that is helpful to you? We would love to hear this. If you're having a Zoom conference with several of your team, that's a question you can ask. What have you found helpful?
I really like that. That's great. Hey, I'm noticing that some questions are coming in. So what I'm going to try and do is we'll take these questions. I'll try this first one. Nancy says, hi, Bob. Your information is so relevant right now. In the current situation, I'm working to find the balance between working from home, teaching my children, and managing the household. Some days it feels I cannot do all three well. If I teach my children well, the house is a mess and I end up working into the late hours of the night. How do I find that balance? Great question, Nancy, because I think all of us are struggling with this isn't just working from home during a snow day. We are being forced into this situation and trying to find that balance day after day. My team is in week 5 right now. So, Dad, would love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say hello to Nancy because her school I was supposed to speak at, and she helped to put together a webinar that I did for them. One of the first things I'm going to say may sound overly simplistic, but there's a wonderful concept in psychology. It's not just in psychology, so it's called self-compassion. And I think we have to give ourselves leeway, and we have to realize we're not going to be able to do everything, and that certain things are going to slip. What I find important in terms of Nancy's question, although we can't predict, especially when you have kids at home, you can't, and especially young kids, as Nancy does, you can't predict all that's going to happen. As much as possible, to think about some kind of structure that you can build in. It's not always going to stick. That you know what I'm thinking of, and it's easier because you and Doug are grown now, so we don't have kids at home. But I know, just like you said in your TV segment this morning, I get up, I exercise, I shower, and I know there's not going to be any other kinds of interruptions. So what I would say to Nancy or anyone is, have a rough idea of a schedule, knowing that it may not always be there. Set aside an hour or two, if possible, where you're just going to focus on your work. Recognize your kids may have certain needs that are going to interfere with that. I really feel that what happens is too often in situations like this, we get very reactive. And we're running to put out one fire and then another and then another. So if we have a rough idea, to say to a child, if they're old enough, you know what, and even show them a clock, I'm going to work for an hour. And then when it's this time for the next 15 minutes or a half hour, whatever, I'm just going to spend with you. And if parents have young kids, I've even said to them, say, this is a very special time. We're not going to have any interruptions here. But I really feel we have to give ourselves a little leeway. I've gotten calls, people saying, I can't do all I want to do. We've never faced a situation like this, quite like this. And that's why the notion of self-compassion, which I've been speaking about, be kind to yourself. Imagine if a friend came to you with the problems you're encountering. What would you say to the friend? Research shows we're some of the harshest critics about ourselves in this regard. And having a schedule we could try to stick with, like Rich, you as a small business owner, a time I'm going to touch base with the staff, a time I'm going to do this, a time I'm going to do this, I feel helps a sense of what I talked before, personal control. At least you have a certain set schedule there.
Yeah, and I would just add in, it's like try and keep up with that schedule, but also be forgiving of yourself as well, because if you're in charge of other people and you've got the household to take care of and kids and perhaps parents as well, there's just a lot of stress there. So be forgiving to yourself.
Definitely.
Lonnie's got a great question I want to jump to. As leaders navigate point to point during this crisis, what are some tips to help them paint a picture of what future success looks like?
Oh, that wonderful question, Lonnie. As a matter of fact, one of the things is I often will have people look at this question. You could do it with your team. What is it going to look like when, say, in this particular case, the coronavirus, whatever is over, whatever over means, but at least, mitigates to some extent. So you have some idea. Why I love this question is it's really a question that is used often in solution-focused therapy. What would happen once a certain crisis is over? And so one could say to a team, assuming whenever it is, so but what is our organization going to look like? In your interview this morning on television, you talked about that this could be an opportunity to relook at your organization, to relook at what you're doing. What things do you want to keep? What are things you may not want to? What the question also triggers for me, Rich, is something I've been asking business leaders. I've also been asking parents this question. What words at the end of the crisis, what words would you, as you look at how you reacted, what words would you use to describe yourself? What words do you hope you would use? And then what are you saying or doing on a regular basis, intentionally saying or doing, so you're likely to use these words? So in one sense, if you say at the end of this crisis, I'd like to see myself having done this, 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 then you can intentionally think about what have I said or done. And the other question, to get very much to your team, is this: what words do I hope my team will use to describe me during this crisis? And then What words am I intentionally saying or doing so they're likely to use these words? This also helps us to be very intentional about the things we're saying or doing. So you look now, and you also, in terms of Lonnie's question, you also look at what are the things we'd like this organization to look at, like when we're all able to get back together. Are there any changes? Let's use this as an opportunity to reflect upon what we're doing, what we want to do differently. And I think these are very important questions. Get us to think about what are we intentionally saying or doing, so that our team will use the words we would hope they use to describe our actions during these difficult times. The same is true with our customers and clients. How would we like our customers and clients to describe us?
I really like that, Dad, because one of the things I'm always focusing on if I'm creating content, a presentation or a course, is start with the end in mind. In fact, I was just interviewing somebody on the podcast the other day about creating online courses, and I said, where do we start? And he said, start with the end in mind. And I think if we are trying to imagine how we want to describe our own actions and our own leadership, as well as how others will view us during this crisis, that kind of gives us the endpoint. And then we can start to work backwards from there and say, well, what actions, what words, what steps can I take to get to that desired place? Doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to get there, but at least I know what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, and Stephen Covey talked about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, successful, effective, that keep that in mind. And that's why I like to make it very personal by saying, how would your team describe you? Would you like them to describe you? How would you like your kids to describe you? Think about what you're saying and doing. It gives you a plan. You feel more of that sense of personal control.
I want to kind of follow up on some of what Lonnie said. We all, as leaders, when no one's watching, have our moments of self-doubt. There have been days that, to me, have felt great, and then all of a sudden, at the end of the day, I'm feeling completely overwhelmed, near tears, and just want to crawl into a corner and just be alone. What can we do to kind of manage that? How much transparency? I mean, I just kind of showed myself, but how much transparency should we show to those people that we hope are looking to us for hope when we're sometimes feeling doubt or concern ourselves?
It's so interesting because Brene Brown, in her book Dare to Lead, talks about good leaders, effective leaders, are not afraid to show their vulnerability. Now, vulnerability doesn't mean weakness in any way. First of all, I always say we should try to remain as calm and reassuring as can be. But it's very important that we validate what other people are feeling. There is nothing wrong, and I'm going to make 2 points, I guess, here. There is nothing wrong with saying to a team, we're all feeling stressed. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm feeling stressed. There are times at the end of the day I do question things. Again, who you would say it to would differ, but to what you just shared is to be human. But the next thing I want to say, it really ties to the notion of resilience, is that you also have to offer realistic hope. So by saying at times I could feel down, at times we all feel down, then to be able to say, one of the things is, though, we all have to look at what we can do to really solve these problems. What will help us? That's when I really get into a problem-solving thing or attitude. Okay, we're feeling this way, we're feeling this day, we wonder about this, but we also can use this as an opportunity to reflect upon what is it we could do differently. But I think for a leader to show his or her vulnerability, again, that doesn't mean weakness, to share their feelings, but also to say there are things we could do about it, that to me is a true leader. And we have leaders today, and I'm not going to get into politics or whatever, who don't show that human side. And that's what gets people very angry. Imagine if, Rich, if you were to say to your team, I'm feeling happy all the time, I feel this, this, this. They could not connect with you. They would be more afraid of sharing some of their doubts or whatever. Now, you're not being a therapist, but I think good leaders are often very therapeutic. But then people feel more comfortable. And, it gets to that notion of positive emotions. If people connect with you, the research shows it almost frees up the brain to be better problem solvers. So there's nothing wrong with you just shared. Now, if every day you were to say to your team, I'm feeling overwhelmed with whatever, then I would say, get some kind of consultation from a business manager or so. But to be able to share human feelings, as long as there's this message of problem solving and hope, to me, is what makes us human.
Good advice. And I just want to remind everybody who's tuning in that we are taking questions from our audience. A lot of the questions have come from you guys checking us out. If you have questions around resilience for yourself, for your team, we'd love to hear from you. Dr. Robert Brooks, my dad, be happy to answer any of these questions. Uh, I want to shift from clients, or I'm sorry, I want to shift from our team to clients. But before I do, I just want to come back to this idea of being a charismatic adult, or perhaps in this case, charismatic leader might be a better term.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever the case is, what other tips or advice do you have so that we can be that charismatic adult that our team needs us to be?
Okay. So one is, as I said, they have to feel that you care about them, that you really, agree with them. I'm not agree, that you're really with them there. And that's why reaching out to them and seeing about them. They have to feel you're listening to them. And that gets to the question of, is there anything I could do for you at this particular point? I think to be that source of strength has to do then with, what I talked about, the problem solving. Let's say there are certain projects that are in the works that you have. One could say, see, this is now a focus on things can get done. How is this project going? Is there any assistance you may need with this project? Is there more information you may need? So now you've created that atmosphere where your team feels you care about them, or employee feels you care about them. And then you could even focus on, of course, things like different projects you have. I think one of the important things that helps people to be resilient, and I alluded to this briefly before, is that they feel, I had put in terms of problem solving, but they feel a sense of ownership. And this is whether there's a coronavirus or not. I always like to ask business leaders, if I interviewed your staff and asked them what decisions do they make about their own work, can they all tell me something? Because in my book about resilience in adults, I cite research that shows if someone comes to work every day and feels they're being micromanaged and told what to do, it actually affects their health. It's such an important need to feel this. So I could see in a phone conversation after, we've created that certain positive emotions, really asking the staff for input. One of the mistakes I think leaders often make is they feel they have to come up with the solutions. I hear this also sometimes from school principals. What should I do with the staff? And, sometimes my answer, it depends on the issue, is ask your staff. Ask your staff if there's a certain problem. What do you think will work? The more the solutions come actually from the staff, the more likely they are to follow through. I mean, I've written a great deal about intrinsic motivation, what comes from within. And the more we can involve staff in making decisions about projects and whatever, I think the more resilient they're going to be.
Thank you. All right, let's shift this. So a lot of us are having to.
Rich, can I mention one other thing? I'm really
Sure,
sorry.
of course.
Okay. There was one other thing I really wanted to mention here. In my research about resilience, and this ties to any situation, but in my research about resilience, one of the things we have found that one of the things that most helps people to be resilient is when they feel they're making a positive difference in the life of someone else. I call it contributory charitable activities. I know this may not be the top priority, but at any age, whether it's a 3-year-old or 75, 80-year-old, is this. As a team leader, and I have parents do this, with their kids or teachers, as a team leader, even to be involved, and I know we're also burdened about a certain charity in town, a local charity. I know you work with a lot of, local groups to somehow raise money or to do something. I know that, your group does that. I feel as a team, one can say, what is it that we can do to enrich the lives of others and come together around that? I think it makes us really feel that we're making a difference. The question Nancy before raised, and I just want to go into this because I think this has to do with compassion and caring in difficult times. When Nancy called in and she thanked me for doing that webinar at her school that had been canceled, I felt afterwards that I felt uplifted because I felt, hey, at least I was making a difference. At least I was doing something I was really enjoying doing at that particular moment. So I really want to emphasize this in anything, if we can feel we're making a difference, if our kids could write, to first responders or something, doing something will make the world of difference. I think it is a basic component that I've written about in terms of resilience. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really wanted to get that point in there.
No, it's a great point because I think sometimes when we're so stressed about everything that's going on in our own life, when we can put the attention, the spotlight on somebody else in a positive way, helping out, something like that, that takes a lot of the burden off, actually. When we're helping somebody else, it kind of removes some of the attention, the negative attention we're putting on ourselves. So I find that to be very therapeutic. And then from a marketing and sales and communication standpoint, which of course is more my background, it's very challenging to market your business during a pandemic. It's so easy to be tone deaf. But when you partner with a nonprofit, you partner with a charity, you figure out how you can give back to your community, that you show that you're part of the local web of what's going on. I think that only has benefits, and it allows you to remind people that, hey, you're a business that's made up of people, that you're connected to the community. And that's a better way anyways to communicate, because then you're communicating from a place of empathy rather than saying, hey, buy our stuff, which nobody really wants to hear these days. Yeah.
Well, and I'll just say this, since I'm a client of yours too, Rich, I think you and your flight team with nonprofits and whatever, and having been at several of your conferences, you do that in such a magnificent way. And during these very troubled times, I know how you've reached out, and it's just very vital. And that's why I really wanted to emphasize that point, to find ways. And it's a good opportunity for parents to involve their kids in small ways. That's what really develops compassion and caring, not lecturing about it, but actual actions can be so helpful.
Well, luckily, I have an excellent team that I work with, so that makes it very easy. So I was going to shift over to talking about how we talk to customers, but I saw this question come in from Karen, which I think is more on talking with our coworkers or employees. I believe the biggest challenge, she says, is not the peers who are already resilient, it's those who have always felt like a victim. How can you build that resilience once that is their pattern? Tough question.
Yeah, it's a lovely question. We're not going to be therapists. And so the first thing I would say is, first of all, don't let a person like this drag you down. But it's a question that one could ask at any time, but it's even more so now. People say, oh my God, I don't know what to do or whatever. I have actually found that trying to convince them, I talk a lot about mindsets, that you should have a more positive attitude. It's like trying to say to someone who says to you, I'm depressed, and you say, no reason for you to be depressed. It's not going to go anywhere. So in this case, the best thing is to be empathic and say, I'm really glad you could tell me how you feel. You validate. Validation doesn't mean you agree. You validate it. Many of us feel this way, but I can see you're really feeling this. And then instead of trying to convince them, say, is there anything I can do to be of help? Now, the typical response is going to be probably not. But what I always feel is, then you could say, if you can think of any way I can be of help, or anyone could be of help at this time, let us know. Just think about it. When I first started asking questions like that, I expected when you ask people what their strengths are, or, what they hope for, they would tell you. And then, I don't know. And I felt like saying, you're not being very helpful in therapy. And then I realized they don't know, or they can't even think about it. So what you want to do is to start to create at least maybe some thoughts. I mean, I know I do this as a therapist, that maybe this can change. But you can't convince someone who's had a victim mindset or victim mentality for years, and now it's even worse what's going on, that you shouldn't think this way. Validate. Say, I can see how you feel. Many of us feel this way. And then just what is it that I might be able to do differently with you? How can I be of help? And just have them think about it. And remember, you're not going to be able to do therapy. There are some people I've seen for 2-3 years in therapy. It's a slow process. And right now, with all that's going on and so many uncertainties, the best you can do is maybe just to be there as support and not think overnight you're going to change their mentality. But the point I made at the beginning, don't let their negativity drag you down. Just be able to recognize it, but say, personal control, that's how they feel, but I don't have to feel that way.
So this is a challenging time for companies and leaders to be communicating with customers and clients. What is it that customers want to hear from companies right now?
Yeah. For me, one, they want to, and I'm going to emphasize this probably throughout this interview, they want to hear that you care about them, that you're thinking about them. An opening comment should simply be, I'm calling just to find out how you're doing, not necessarily how is your business doing or, and that. So I'm just calling to find out, how are you doing? Are there certain things that I can be of help with? I think for me, then it takes it out of what you said before. You don't want to seem like you're marketing and selling your product at a time when people are feeling that they need some kind of life, raft or something to get into. And you could ask them if you know their family, or even if you don't, how is your family doing? And how are things going? You could share with them that this is not an easy time. Some people may say, that sounds so simplistic, but those are things that bind people together. Those say we're all in this together. Then once you do that, one could get into much more specifics around if there was a certain project you're involved in. Maybe we could discuss this project at this point or whenever you would like to. And something that I find very important is invite them to contact you. As a therapist, I used to do that. And some people would say to me, oh, God, you can't be on duty 24/7. I say, you know what? The more I found that I let people know I was accessible, I actually got fewer phone calls than some other people, knowing that you're there. Another thing is, one of the things I found very helpful is actually setting aside a time. Again, this has nothing to do with the coronavirus, but maybe it's even more open. Maybe a call-in time, or people could schedule a time for 15 minutes to chat with you. So now it's on a schedule. So I used to do that. I'm an early riser. And when I worked at McLean Hospital at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8, people knew they could reach me. And some people said to me that that was very important. So that also, they want to feel you're there for them. If in any way, and this almost never happened, you feel people are taking advantage of all these hours they want, but I really didn't find that at all on that. So it's to really contact them, be very active, find out how they're doing. And that doesn't mean just one phone call. And then also you could talk about their business. You could talk about how you might be of help. Question you ask me, it could be an opportunity for you to say to them, as you emerge from this, as we all emerge, are there things you're thinking about doing differently in your business? Have you talked to the team about it? That to me is then the consultant is bringing up a real nice problem solving attitude. These are things to think about and consider.
Yeah, problem solving attitude. I think it also depends on whether you're in a B2B or B2C company. So B2B, because I know we've got two different audiences here. We have
Sure.
perhaps the Flight New Media people who know me, and of course we have all the teachers and educators and event planners that know you, Dad. B2B is business to business.
Right.
B2C is business to consumer. So those can be very different businesses.
Right.
For B2C, it may be a lot about, maybe the focus is more about your role in the community. I was
Mhm.
talking to a coffee shop today, and we were talking about how people miss that routine of coming to the coffee shop, getting a pastry. What could we do maybe to remind people of that? Talked to a doggy daycare that, of course, had to close at least temporarily, and they're getting pictures from some of the doggies who are sad because they can't come in, and talking about how to kind of continue that conversation, versus B2B, where people want to know, how do they market their business or how they do this. There are companies that almost need to fill a role. So maybe some of this has to do with the type of business you're in and what people want to hear from you. But I do agree that checking in, regardless of how you're checking in, definitely makes a difference. And we've seen that in our own business. When we're doing outreach for clients right now, my team is probably busier than they ever been, not necessarily with billable work, but just in terms of making those connections and staying in touch with people and seeing how we can serve them. And I'm seeing a lot of our clients do the exact same thing with their client base and their customer base. And it gets back to what you said earlier. It's, how do you want to be seen when all this is over?
Right.
it's great if that comes from an intrinsic place, but even if it doesn't, like just use that and kind of model that behavior of how you want to be seen. How do you want people to think about you?
But even when you think about the dogs, posting pictures of dogs or whatever, I think that's a wonderful idea. I would say every business owner should invite all of the dog, well, the dog owners to post
Right.
pictures, anything that connects. And the other thing I'm smiling is, uh, what's the best way of saying this? Because one has to be careful. A sense of humor is one of the most critical aspects of being resilient. This doesn't mean being sarcastic or whatever. I think I have gotten more cartoons sent to me at a time like this, and some are funny. I mean, it's a very difficult time, but we should never lose that sense of humor. And the other thing is not to be childish, but childlike at times. Like I smiled with all the dogs showing. I could imagine the coffee shop or so, something that they could do. I have no idea, but it connects with people. And again, it's associated with positive feelings and positive emotions, which I could spend hours on. All my workshops now, I spend a great deal of time on that. Do you create positive emotions so people will be more willing to listen to you? Because we know that positive emotions actually free you to be better problem solvers there. But thank you for the distinction between B2B and B2C, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's a very important distinction. Some of the ideas, I've mentioned apply to both, but certainly there are differences in those two audiences.
So, Ted, you mentioned earlier this solving attitude. How can we assume a problem solving attitude? What does that mean exactly? And what does it look like both for our clients and our customers?
Yeah, there are several aspects that I talk about a problem solving attitude. And so one is, first of all, you have to agree that there's a problem. And this may seem very funny, but sometimes I've worked with teams where someone thinks there's a problem, someone doesn't. So one, you have to be able to articulate the problem. Then, and this is going to sound very simplistic, but it's not. Then you have to look at what are what your goals are and what are 2 or 3 ways of reaching those goals. So you want to look at particular strategies. And I know I'm saying this hurriedly because the process itself could be months in the making. Once you have an idea of the goals and then the strategies to reach, look at strategies to reach them, select the one that you think will work best. Some strategy that you think will work best. You try that. But, and this is the part I'm going to underline under the but on this. One of the big mistakes I made years ago as a beginning psychologist and as a consultant was I thought everything that went on in my office or someone else's office sounded great. But you know what I found? Sometimes in quotes, the real world, it didn't work. So you have to also, in terms of problem solving, prepare for obstacles. And I started to bring this up, this kind of question, but I had to make sure it didn't come across as a self-fulfilling prophecy for failure. I'd say, this sounds very good, but if it shouldn't work, what's our backup plan? Because you know what I found? If you didn't have a backup plan, people then felt even worse. They really felt, see, I can't do anything. And then the work of psychologist Gabrielle Oettingen, she came up with a great technique. She called it mental contrasting. And just to let the viewers know, I've used this in school and businesses. She would say, now that we have this strategy, and this sounds, again, so straightforward, let's consider 2 or 3 or 1 or 2, it doesn't matter, obstacles to reaching that. And what she found is if you thought about the obstacles, to make sure it wasn't self-fulfilling prophecy for failure, then she would say, if this obstacle appears, and this gets to the problem solving, how do you think you'll feel? But more importantly, if this obstacle appears, how do you plan to deal with it? So what she found is if you simply look at goals or strategies and not obstacles, you're going to have a problem. If all you think about are the obstacles, you're going to have a problem. But if you could think about what are the strategies or goals, what are the obstacles, but what are steps you're going to take if an obstacle appears, she found those people were best able to be good problem solvers and they were best able to meet their particular goals. And so thinking about obstacles does not have to be like thinking about a self-fulfilling prophecy for failure. It's preparing us. It's really another example of what I call personal control, because when you feel you have ways of coping, you're going to be more resilient. And so when you've anticipated obstacles, you now have ways of coping rather than feeling like, oh my heavens, I don't know what to do next.
All right, Dad, I want to circle back to the question on humor
Mhm.
because humor is great, and I love sharing memes and stuff like that about like what people are going through. I almost think like memes are the hieroglyphics of the modern world. Like they're just such a fast way to,
Right.
between that and emojis, to share what's going on in a kind of humorous way. In fact, one of the best reactions I've gotten since the coronavirus started was the Brinks truck rolled up in front of Hannaford, our local supermarket, and I took a picture and said, "Oh, it looks like the toilet paper delivery has finally arrived." And people love that because we're all going through the same pain points.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. But you said, don't use sarcasm, which is literally the only kind of humor I know. So, what are your tips for using humor but not being tone deaf at the
Okay.
same time?
First, what I meant by sarcasm is, if you first of all, if you're using it with people who know you, that is one thing. Uh, it brought back a memory. In the 1980s, I wrote a chapter about the use of humor in therapy. And I said, don't use sarcasm. And someone asked, well, what if you're not sure? I said, then don't use it. Because you have to think of this. If you're with your team and they know you and they like you, you could say things that you're not going to say necessarily outside.
Sure.
So, I mean, one of the things I've often said is, if I'm not sure, because I use a lot of humor with kids and adults, if I'm not sure this isn't going to be experienced that way, because empathy means put yourself in their shoes, don't say it at all. So you have to have a certain relation. Now, if you're using it where people are, like watching here and you really don't know them, one then has to say, I have to be very careful because what I think may be humor may be really hitting someone where I shouldn't. You're not always going to be correct. But that's why there's some, like, I remember when you sent that cartoon of the Brinks truck, and I'm laughing now, and toilet paper. Anyone could relate to that, and it's for me, it's just something that you look at that and say, oh my God, yeah, toilet paper is more, valuable than money. I mean, people were spending plenty. That's the kind I use with people we know who already have a history with us. We could probably say, say more things. But there are some things where 99.99% you're pretty sure are not going to be offended by it. And what it does is humor really, in a workshop I gave for the Stress Summit, I talked about it really connects people. It really helps to, I think, elevate our spirits. It doesn't deny things. See, anything I'm saying, we're not denying what's going on, but we're finding ways where we can find some some ways to relax, some ways to really connect with other people. Humor certainly can do that. I think it also creates what I've been talking about, these positive emotions that you create in any environment. And Rich, I know you have a pretty good sense of humor.
Yeah, it obviously skipped a generation. Um, that was sarcasm, by the way, in case
Yes,
people are
but you
watching at
see, I
home.
know you,
Yeah.
the
Uh,
audience.
and I also think it's kind of like the humor that works today. I mean, there's definitely dark humor and it can be
Right.
funny, but it's maybe not something that somebody from a position of leadership should be sharing. I think the humor that leaders should be sharing should be a little bit more uplifting. And that joke about the Brinks truck also is something that kind of like shows the bond. We're all going through this stuff together. And I think
Exactly.
that's an important message to get across.
Exactly. Yeah, because however much money you had, I know even wealthy people were having trouble getting toilet paper for a while.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tanner's got a question. Do you think it's important to keep in mind that people may be looking to you as an example of what to do? Should we all keep that in mind? And I think he's talking about as a leader or as somebody who's very present and active on social media, the way that Tanner is. How might that impact the way that you communicate with the outside world?
Yeah. One of the things I always say, and it has to do with empathy, and Tanner's question again is very important in this regard, is people, especially if you're in a certain area of expertise, are going to look towards you. So one of the things in my workshops I say, write down, and it's similar to what I said before, all the words you hope your family would use, your customers, your clients would use to describe you, and then what are you actually saying and doing so they're likely to use these words. That's why before I said, and I think about some of the books on leadership, that we can share our feelings and whatever, but we always have to think about that there are certain boundaries that people will look to us. If we come across as not reassuring and it's not very calm, then of course that we're not going to, they're going to get more anxious. Our team's going to get more anxious. So we walk that tightrope, but it has to be genuine. I can feel anxious and I can feel a lot of different things. But if I'm talking about resilience, I know that there are things we can do. If I didn't feel that way, I could never come on an interview like this, Rich. People know if you're not going to be true to yourself. So in Tana's question, keep in mind that people looking at you, I always assume that every one of them is looking at you. Every one of them is going to form images of you. Every one of them is going to have words to describe you. Now, everyone is different. And this point I want to emphasize, I could give a workshop for 50 people. 49 out of the 50 could love it. One person may not. I wish I didn't think as much about the one person who not. That's human nature. But I feel that, you know, if I'm talking about resilience, I have to model it. If I'm talking about exercise and don't exercise, I'm not being genuine. So any suggestions I make, people know whether you're really, being true. And we have to adopt certain behaviors. Teachers, if they say they want students to see them as caring, I always say, what does that mean? What are ways you could express your caring about them? I was watching, there was some interview with a girl where the teacher, during this time when schools are closed, the teacher got online to wish her a happy birthday. And she said, I didn't know a teacher would do that.
Yeah.
But those are the little things that form images or impressions of you that are going to be lifelong.
Absolutely. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, what are some other tips you have, maybe that we haven't talked about yet, for staying positive or staying resilient during this pandemic?
Well, there are a few. One is greatly limit how much news you watch. I will tell you, it's other people have said this. It is very, very difficult. I have minimized the amount of news I watch because you know what? It's repetition, repetition, repetition. Some people, I don't want to see their news conferences. And I say, why do that? I would rather, when I'm using the treadmill in the morning, get a few minutes of the local news, see what's happening, a few minutes of the national. And then what I'll do is, and I wait till the end of the day, I'll go to, CNN.com or something, look at the main headlines. The other, I think it's very important in terms of the structure. As much as possible, by 5 o'clock, I don't want to do any more work. I know it's not always possible. And, some of the questions that were raised, if you have little kids, whatever, but I don't want to do any work. Also find things that may be fun, games you want to play. Your mother and I, are watching some Broadway shows. There's this Broadway HD. We found that we could watch certain shows in that regard. And really to reach out to certain people. I think that really helps us to be uplifted. And by cutting down the amount of news, we're not in any way ignoring things. We're really saying that, I have control over this. Why aggravate myself, or why see all of this? I'm still going to keep informed in that way. And as I said before, just reach out also to people who may need to hear from us in that regard. It lifts us up well. And getting back to self-compassion, don't worry if what your goals may have been, you're not reaching all of them during this time. There are too many other things, unpredictable things going on. We have to be kind to ourselves. I know all of this is easier said than done, but we have to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And again, checking in on other people, family members, friends, clients, coworkers. I find it kind of releases endorphins in us as well. It takes some of the attention off of ourselves for a little while. It puts the attention on somebody else. We can focus on, their problems, their concerns, and how we can help. And that, at least for me, releases a lot of endorphins. Plus, just getting a call out of the blue from a family member you haven't talked to in a while, or a vendor that you didn't know cared about you and they're not trying to pitch you on something, like that makes you feel good too. So that's definitely another way of kind of sharing some of your feelings of positivity or your feelings of resilience.
Wait, did everyone see Elena's comment on the screen? There was a comment
I'll read it out loud for those.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful.
Elena says, when very little, a friend of my mom's told us that every time we giggled and laughed, there was a little bubble in our bellies that bounced up to our brains, which would make us happy. I remember this conversation to this day. Your message about humor strikes me as the adult version of this very sweet thought. Thank you. Yeah, your mom was describing endorphins. So that was fantastic. Yes. Or a friend of your mom.
What else I want to say, where she says, I remember to this day, it's what I talked about before in research, that one comment you make, even one comment, one gesture, in my research, 40, 50 years later, the person will remember it. Hopefully it's positive, but they will remember that. It is amazing. They may forget what happened the day before, but they will remember some of these acts of kindness, these brief micro affirmations.
All right. Dad, which is your favorite son, me or Doug?
Someone just wrote, Rich has a great sense of humor. Yeah, go ahead. Who's my favorite son, you or Doug?
Yeah, I think that's what everybody wants to know right now.
I didn't see that. I agree, Rich has a great sense of humor. Okay. Doug would probably say, hands down, it's him. And you would say, I don't know. Let me just say this. I'm not going to embarrass you or Doug, but Mom and I could feel very fortunate that you're both our sons, and you've given us wonderful grandchildren. And I know it may sound funny that you and Doug, in many ways, are charismatic adults to us now that you're both grown. And it's really just a pleasure to be interviewed by you for a show like this. And we're just very proud of both of you.
Well, that is a very honest answer, and I appreciate it.
Are people seeing this?
They are seeing this. Dad, I do want to thank you for your time. This has been absolutely great, and I appreciate you making the time for us. People can feel free to continue to leave questions, and maybe my dad or I, as appropriate, can answer those questions after the session is over. If you missed any of this, it was recorded. First of all, you can watch it live, or you can watch it on demand on Facebook starting soon, but we'll also have a high-def version that we'll make available probably on my dad's website, on Flight's website, and other places as well. Dad, for people who are just being introduced to you and maybe want to check out some more stuff that you've done and created, where can we send them?
Yeah, it's on my website, produced by your company. It's just drdrobertbrooks.com. And as you know, Rich, since like 1999, I was one of the first people to have a website because my son was in the business. I write a monthly article, 10 articles a year. And many of the things we discussed today, there are briefer articles that people can find, and there are other resources that are listed there. So that would be the best place to go. You were the one who convinced me to have a website before I knew what a website was.
Right. Well, and then you kept on letting me rebuild your website almost every 3 months for fear that I would fail as a business person and have to move back home. So I really appreciate that as well.
Now you have a staff doing that.
Yeah. But honestly, if you want to go check out my dad's work, again, go to drrobertbrooks.com. He's also going to be producing some videos coming up in the next few months that he's starting to work on. So that's exciting. But in the meantime, he's got a ton of great books you can check out. A lot of stuff on for teachers and parents as well. Not just, in fact, that's almost the focus, not just on business people. But Dad, love you very much. Really enjoyed doing this. Give Mom my best, and I'm sure we'll be in touch very soon.
Love you very much, Rich, and Doug too, in case he's watching. Okay, thanks.
Probably isn't, because again, number one son. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in today.
Bye-bye.